Dr. Solomon alluded to, I'm an alumnus 3 times of this university, undergrad, MSW, and PhD. Give it up for yourselves, all right. I think a lot of you are familiar with the term or the phrase, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Well, that is so very true. And as I was coming here this morning, I realized it's been over 20 years since I was an MSW student. I know that sounds like a long time for some of you. And I remember 20 years ago, when I was a student here, I would hang out with Carrie Lou, because she was in the program also. Carrie, where are you? So I'm giving up Carrie's age right now. She was a student 20 years ago. But I also was a student, and I was impressed by the faculty of this fine School of Social Work. And I wanted to learn from them, and I wanted to be like them. I remember Bob Nishimoto. Bob, where are you? Stand up, Bob. Nobody could make me laugh in class like Bob Nishimoto, and nobody was more approachable than Bob Nishimoto, and certainly no one was more patient with me than Bob Nishimoto. I wanted to learn and be like that. I remember John Brecky. John, are you in the room? All right, John Brecky. This man walked around with an intense look on his face all the time, and he was brilliant, and I wanted to be like John Brecky. And of course, there was the person who was my mentor. But actually, that's too soft a word. She was my idol, and that was Dr. Barbara Solomon. And I always looked at her and I said, I want the moral courage that this woman brings to her life and to her profession. And now 20 years later, I come back to campus, and what do? I have breakfast with Carrie Lou. I can't break that habit. But I see Bob Nishimoto, I see John Brecky, and I see Dr. Barbara Solomon, and I say, even though today I'm a dean of a college, I still want to be like them. So to all of you who are here today, thank you for coming. You are a part of an institution that not only creates personal memories that last decades, but you are a part of an institution that forges values that will guide your professional life forever. So congratulations to all of you. To the alumni and friends in the house, welcome home. To the faculty and staff, thank you for the work you do for our profession, but more importantly for our nation and for our world. And for the students in the room, congratulations, you have picked the best social work program that you can come to. Give yourselves a hand. We have a wonderful panel here today, a panel that is made up of individuals who can honestly say, I make a difference. Individuals who can say, I am a part of my community, but I am also a part of building bridges. Individuals who can say that community building is what I am all about. I'm going to call them up one by one, and I've been asked to just introduce them by name and by title, because I could go on, but I'll have them make their own introductory remarks. First of all, I'd like to call up Reverend Cecil Murray, former pastor. Former pastor of the First AME Church of Los Angeles. Next, I would like to call up Ms. Teresa De Crescenzo. Executive Director of the Gay and Lesbian Adolescent Social Services Organization. And thirdly, I'd like to call up Ms. Lydia Brazon, the Executive Director of the Humanitarian Law Project. Executive Director of the Humanitarian Law Project, International Educational Development. We will be joined by a fourth panelist, Mr. Salam S. Excuse me. I'd like to introduce our fourth panelist, Mr. Salam S. Al-Marayati. He is the director and one of the founders of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Let's give them all a hand. Reverend Murray, we'll start with you if you'd like to make your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. It is a blessing to be among you. The minute you say social people, you say work. If you're 40 years and under now, scientists tell us in 30 years, you'll live to be 120 years of age. And you have decided to devote that time to getting married to the community. Please, it is the same as with a marriage between a male, female, or two females, two males, whatever you might agree on with marriage. I am marrying you to make you happy, not for you to make me happy. I'm already happy. If I were unhappy, it would be unfair of an unhappy me to give myself to a happy you. That makes you a giver. And a good marriage is between a giver and a giver. Everybody say exotic. With the divorce rate being 50% and climbing, normal marriages are between a giver and a taker. Everybody say neurotic. And occasionally, we find a marriage between a taker and a taker. Everybody say psychotic. Please, givers, prepare yourselves to meet neurosis and psychosis. You will not always meet people who will say, I love you. You will say to us, I love you. And we will respond, and I love me. So that makes two of us that love me. Keep on keeping on. The best is yet to come.
Why do they always give me the toughest act to follow? Why you gotta do me like that? Okay, well, I'll try. I just got off a plane, so you'll forgive me for, it's my brand new laptop, and I haven't figured out how you burn a CD, in which case I'd have printed my notes out. But, you know, we were asked to address 4 questions here today, and even though Dean Flynn said, you know, this is a school material, et cetera, I know you don't want me to start with question number 1. The principles are, you know, and you do the notes thing, and then I give you a quiz, and you regurgitate it all back to me, and so on. I want to talk in a more contextualized way about those 4 questions we were asked to address. And Dr. Solomon, I'm particularly appreciative of 2 things that you mentioned in your opening remarks, because both of them are in my notes. One of them is about the other. And if we were in a classroom and I were delivering a lecture, I'd be talking to you about Thomas Szasz and his work, The Manufacture of Madness, about how in our country we appear to need to create an other. He tells a Jerzy Kosinski myth about the myth of the painted bird, where it's a long myth, and I won't take the time to tell it all. But at the end of the myth, an angry person takes a bird, a white bird, and splashes it with many colors of paint and then releases it, and the bird returns to fly with its flock, and the other birds turn and peck it to death because it's different, because we seem to need to create an other in our society. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And the other thing that you mentioned was the civil unrest following the Rodney King verdict. And I actually see the verdict in the Rodney King matter and the civil unrest that followed as a direct connection to the terrible betrayal that took place in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, because both of those issues were about the same thing. They were about lack of accountability and the contempt and the arrogance that goes with lack of accountability. Those 4 police officers were not held accountable. Those 4 police officers were not held accountable. And the current set of government, whether you want to point the finger here, there, or elsewhere, I honestly believe this goes well beyond racism in terms of the bridge building issue. And when I say it goes beyond racism, we do live in a society where racial tensions continue to endure, though we're certainly all working on them, I hope. But this goes beyond racism. This is a betrayal of the basic covenant that is between our government and the human beings who inhabit this United States. And I don't know about the rest of you. We all were inundated with images during the time of the hitting, the storm hitting, and then the evacuations and so on. And every major newspaper in the United States had that horrible picture of a human being floating face down, front page of the New York Times, front page of the LA Times, and I'm sure all over the world. That's not the image that stays with me. The image that stays with me is when the cameras are panning here and there and here and there, and I'm not sure, I think they were in the convention center, and a woman in a rage looked in the camera and said, "For God's sake, we're Americans." That's the image that stays with me, because we seem to have forgotten. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was down at Unity Church, because I love to hear the only close competition you ever had was Bishop Carl Bean. And I enjoyed hearing Carl, and I knew he was going to talk about this issue, and he said, "Didn't the Lord pull the covers off some shit down there? Didn't the Lord pull the covers off of some shit down there?" And in point of fact, the shit that the Lord pulled the covers off of is, in social work, we talk about the underclass. The underclass. I hate that term. And every time I see it in a textbook, I just slide right on over it. I hate that term. What does that mean, the underclass? Well, certainly what it means in terms of the betrayal that took place in our country with our lack and our failure to respond to what was happening, to the plight of people. It's not about poor or rich. That's not about white or black. You don't need to go to USC to understand that if we had an earthquake that leveled Beverly Hills, we'd have done a better job of responding. You didn't have to go to college to figure that out. But the levee, the broken levee, to me, represents the betrayal. Along with the Rodney King similarity, we have had betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. So in answering those 4 questions that were posed to us today, I know we all have community organizing experience. We can all sit and talk about the fact that the president shouldn't have cut the Army Corps of Engineers budget so they couldn't build the levee and so on and so on. But this is not about that. It's too late to make amends. It's too late for the government. It's too late for George Bush to say, "Hell of a job, Brownie." Well, he can change the name from Brownie to somebody else and say, "Hell of a job." It's too late. And the only way in which we are now going to re-knit the torn fabric of our relationships with human beings, one to another, is all of us. Is all of us. You, me, all of us at the most basic level of humans responding to one another, because nobody believes the government anymore. I don't care if you're a laissez-faire economist. I don't care if you are in favor of changing Social Security. Why do you think he couldn't get anywhere with that Social Security reform effort? He couldn't get anywhere because you can't tear at the basic fabric of the contract, the covenant with human beings in this country. And that's what happened. That's what, to me, those symbols and those metaphors are all about. A core, basic betrayal. And the only way I see to re-knit the fabric is us person to person accepting and acknowledging the fact that we are a nation with a basically broken covenant. You know, in the United States, in our military, we are known for the tremendous amount of respect we show for our dead, right? In the military, when the skirmish is over, our guys and gals go back, don't they? They pick up the dead. That's why we have dog tags, so that if we can't get back and pick you up, someone will know who you were. At the terrible tragedy at 9/11, what happened when they picked up a finger, a toe? They carefully, lovingly wrapped it. And if that finger or toe had the tiny fabric of a police or fire uniform, what'd they do? They stood at attention and they saluted a dead finger. Because that's what we do. But what did we do this time? We let dead people lie in the muck as if they were garbage. There's no way the government makes up to anybody, to us, for that. That's not about black and white. That's not about being a racist. That's not being about a social conservative. That's not about being a liberal. That's about the core, basic contract that we all have as Americans. For God's sake, we're Americans. That's the contract that when terrible things happen, we'll at least take care of you, however poor, whatever color. And we didn't do that. And the only way it's going to get healed is for us to re-knit that fabric one person at a time. I don't see any government program or any sum of money that's going to repair that. Thank you. Look at that one. That was basic.
Another tough act to follow. Well, I just realized that in my efforts to abbreviate my bio sketch that I left out something very important, and that is that I started out as a social worker, so in a light psychiatric facility. It had also reminded me, because we specialize in armed conflict law at Humanitarian Law Project, that the folks that make up the basis for the work in Chiapas around the Zapatistas, including Marcos, were all social workers. They all started their work with the indigenous for 10 years before the uprising. So the point is you can't predict where your social work is going to take you. Well, as executive director of the Humanitarian Law Project, and we have consultative status at the United Nations, and people think that that's strictly nation to nation. But we took Rodney King, we took Prop 87, Prop 187, we took the prison abuse in Brazoria, Texas. We take all of that to the United Nations. We're probably the only non-governmental organization to do so. I'm also, by the way, on the board of KPFK 90.7 FM. It's a listener-sponsored radio station. And so I had left that off as well. But I'm just going to make a brief introduction, because in the course of this, it's my background from being with Humanitarian Law Project and also president of Americans for Democratic Action and Chiapas Coalition. The list goes on, and the older you get, the longer it gets. and how that applies to all of these things, including Katrina, because I have a KPFK story regarding that, but I'm anxious to get on with the panel discussion, so that's it for now.
Good morning. I forgot to put on my bio that I also wanted to be a social worker, but never got to the point of applying for the school in my college. In fact, when I graduated from high school, my dad sat me down, and being a good immigrant father, he was looking out for my well-being, and he said, I want you to choose, the major, your major in college. I want you to choose what you like the most, because then you'll be the best at it. And I said, great, I get to figure out what I want to do. So the next night, he sat me down again, and he said, okay, what have you decided? Are you going to be a doctor or an engineer? So I tried both. I failed at both, and I ended up doing this, because this is really my passion. I work for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and just a few points, and I think everything's really been stated beforehand, and I'm eager as well to get on with the panel discussion and the question and answer session. So I'll be very, very brief. Just a few points. Number one, that is that if you look to the response of 9/11 and you look to the response of the Katrina disaster, you see completely opposite responses by the government. In fact, I think the way the Katrina disaster has been handled is a sham, and it's really the issue is trying to be shoved to the side by bringing back the issue of the war, by bringing back the issue of terrorism, by bringing back all these other issues that are, of course, important issues, and we should deal with all these issues. The question is, how do we deal with it effectively? And it's not a zero-sum game where you go to war so you don't have to deal with disaster relief. The fact is, and as the previous speakers have stated, this is an issue of race and religion and the way we treat each other. And the problem is that race and religion continue to divide us today. And in the 21st century, there should be no excuse for anything to divide us. We are a sophisticated country. We are a great people. America it deserves a lot better than this. And so it does require not just the government getting its act together, but it requires the people making the government accountable. And that's what has to change. Instead of just accepting the status quo, but demanding change to something that is better for humanity and better for America. One of our sayings in our office, the world is not divided into Christians, Muslims, and Jews. The world is divided into stupid people and intelligent people. And we should start looking to the problems, whether it's terrorism or disaster relief or war, in that light. And of course, for Muslim Americans, I think the problem today is that we continue to offer our services to the government, whether it's Katrina relief, because by the way, there are a lot of Muslim doctors in Houston who opened their doors for free public service. Muslims raised over $10 million in relief aid and did a feeding at the Astrodome for one day. And they do all these great things, but the frustration for Muslims is that whatever we do, it never gets acknowledged. It doesn't register in the national arena. Even in terms of our counterterrorism work, what we've done in terms of partnership with law enforcement and community policing, what we've done in meeting with the President and the FBI Director and the Secretary of Homeland Security in terms of offering our valuable services, in terms of processing information, in terms of helping to prevent another 9/11 from happening, and also being at the front line of countering extremism in the name of religion. This is what Muslims are doing these days, and the frustration is that it's not being noticed. Let me just give you one statistic that we did with 200 college students at a recent convention, Muslim convention. The question was, have you noticed a significant hostility towards Muslims in the general American public? 70% said yes, which is a staggering figure. And then the second question is, if so, do you believe that the general American public recognizes this hostility? And only 38% said yes. And it's not that we should be in a race for suffering or who's suffering more, who should be more frustrated. There's no time to really be frustrated. But the issue is that there's not that dialogue between each other. There's not that cooperation and partnership with each other at the grassroots level. And that's what we have to change in terms of our communities and our neighborhood and our society. And then help the government be held accountable and do its job, and that is to protect this country and to provide opportunity for any American, regardless of race or religion or any other background for that matter. Thank you very much.
Okay, it sounds like we've had a number of issues placed on the table. So let me start off with a kind of a global question. In an urban, diverse setting like Los Angeles, and certainly in a diverse nation like the United States, how do we begin to rebuild that social fabric, that social contract that Ms. DiCrescenzo talked about in her remarks? And she contrasted very nicely the reaction to 9/11 versus the reaction to Katrina and how the social fabric has been torn away. What are your thoughts on specific strategies or specific things that we can begin to sink our teeth into right now?
I think care packages, social workers, I think you will find that ours is not a failure of know-how. Ours is a failure of will. We have the know-how. We have the expertness to accomplish anything that we say yes to. For instance, when it comes to know-how, we have only to take those military installations that have been shut down or downsized, take the evacuees there for a protracted period of time, give them a support group, a blanket, network that will keep them from falling through. And away we go towards restoration. And it would have to be a realistic understanding that some cannot, will not return to the Mississippi Delta and the areas. We can realistically come up with a strategic planning for anything that we will to do it. So the question doesn't concern how we're going to do it, but do we want to do it? To build bridges, you need human engineers. You need people who care, different folks, and folks who are different, not allowing their differences to make a difference. And you say, what is the difference? I could care, or I could care less. If you care, you are careful, full of care, and you overflow with care. You never have to ask if someone is careful, you just see the overflow. If you are careless, then you underflow, and people can spot that also. At this tick of the watch, there are those who would look at the videos, the flooding, the desolation on the Gulf Coast, and just shrug, I could care less. And perhaps the worst of all is being carefree. I am a robot. I do not feel pain. I do not feel joy. So we have to decide whether we're careful, careless, or carefree. Then if we're careful, we design. And we design not only for destiny, but we also design for disaster. The Gulf Coast was designed for destiny, the Big Easy. It was forewarned about disaster, but they did not seem to care. I guess social workers naturally have stars in their eyes. Praise be to God that you would be more optimistic than pessimistic. But what we need is neither the optimist nor the pessimist, but the pessimist, the one who will get up and do something about it and make it go. We can fix the hole in the levee. If we will it, it will be done.
Ms. Brazon?
I think I forgot to mention that I too am a graduate of USC School of Social Work class of sorry, the mic isn't working quite. Oh, there it is. It's working now. You know, I think that the people in New Orleans, the poor and the dispossessed, were not, and probably still are not, sentimental. They already knew before that levee broke. They already knew that we live in an unfair and unjust society. They already knew that they had the most corrupt police force in the history of the United States until it got revamped a year or two ago. They already knew that their schools were inferior. And again, I go back to my opening comments about, for God's sake, we're Americans. I think that the point is then that at least they thought that if something like that happened, that their government would take care of them. So what strategies might we use? I think there has to be a commitment, and I certainly agree with Reverend Murray, it remains to be seen what's going to be rebuilt and what's not going to be rebuilt at all, just in terms of the logistics. But I think, again, human engineers know how to do these things. They've done it, by the way, in other countries. The Dutch have protected themselves with levees that don't break. So have the Brits, the River Thames. So it can be done. But we have to have a commitment, and the strategies have to be that the schools will be excellent. I mean, we can keep lamenting. They knew for years that those levees were in danger. And the Government Corps of Engineers, and the budget got cut so they couldn't rebuild and shore up. So we already know all that. But we are where we are today. And the strategies have to be that we must insist that their children get the same quality schools that they deserve. They talked about, we warned them to evacuate. 30% of the people in New Orleans don't have a car. Hello? Okay, just drive down that highway right there. With what? They couldn't evacuate if they wanted to evacuate. So we have to, in terms of strategies, we have to make sure that they have a police department that works, that is not corrupt. That they have processes, political processes, that are transparent, that are not behind closed doors. That they have school systems that work. That they have a levee that this time is guaranteed not to break, because it can be done. It wasn't just, gee, we never expected that. If I hear one more politician say we didn't expect it, yes, we did. We expected it, we saw it coming, and did nothing. So that's what I think has to be at the core of the strategies, that the basic infrastructure, Head Start programs, we've got the data. You're studying it now. We've got the data. The kids who go to Head Start programs do better. Then why don't they have any Head Start programs there? Why don't they have a school system that works? Why don't they have a police department that works? And on and on and on and on and on. Those are the systems that have to change fundamentally. And then the human beings will do the job of knitting the fabric, as I see it. Thank you.
Ms. Brazon.
And I'm going to try to bring it all the way back here, but I can relate back there. There's a coalition there of about 100 wonderful organizations in Mississippi and New Orleans right now who are very progressive, wonderful organizations, including Community Labor United and others that we've been working with. But I can tell you, and they had a huge meeting this last weekend, is that they are going to have huge challenges even among themselves, having been in so many coalitions that are diverse, because not everyone understands the work that has to take place in these organizations. I don't care how progressive they are, it happens. Most of the challenges, most of the issues with racism that I have faced have been in organizations and on boards that are considered to be the most progressive, and where everyone on the board thinks that they are totally enlightened in areas of racism. And that is where the challenges are. It's a lot of things, and it's so painful. If you end up going into mediation and any kind of training of that sort, you end up crying and yelling and screaming and whatever. At the end, it's very beneficial. If you don't do that, it all stays suppressed, and you will never get anywhere. And what I mean by that is this, and so I don't care if you're on a school club or whatever it is, and if you're in an organizational structure, please, I urge you to go through some kind of training because of the following. There are so many things that divide us. I've been on boards where the divide is between African Americans and Africans, because the African is an immigrant. There is kind of a subliminal caste system right now. If you are the assimilated native of the United States soil, you are below the immigrant regardless of the country. There is a divide between Chicanos and Mexicanos and other immigrants from Latin America. There is a language divide. Most people think if you're Chicano, you're Spanish speaking, and let me tell you, you may or may not be, and very likely may not be. So there is a language divide. There is the cultural divide on things, even if you're on a board, for example. Robert's rules, military-based Robert's rules, that gets us through meetings very efficiently. But what if you have an indigenous background? What if you come from a Mayan country and you're given to consensus, resolving issues through consensus rather than Robert's rules? And you're immediately dismissed by that board because you want to have real, true, deep dialogue, even if it takes a little bit longer. These are the kinds of things. I will tell you a little story back in the day, in the Clinton administration, and that administration reached out to me 3 times because they had 3 spots reserved for Central American Americans, right? My mother was from Nicaragua, so I kept getting all these calls to go into that administration. I went to DC to check it out, and I was walking down the stairs with someone else who was up for a position, and couldn't do it. There's a line that I had crossed in terms of my political and social evolution, which said to me, I can't be someone's token assimilated Latina. I speak, general American English, no accents of any kind. And you have to make a decision, where are you going to have the greatest impact? In a government position, depending on what it is, because some really can move you forward and you can do a great deal for your constituency. But in other positions, you may be more effective on the outside. And on the outside means that every single person in this room, whatever your environment is, can move that structure and that environment forward to greater understanding. But it's not easy. It is not about doing and saying the politically correct thing. It is about not doing that. It is about challenging, what is your problem with me? It is about raising, you have to get away from the comfort zone and get into a little bit of pain so that you can come out on the other side. And that is the beginning of growing and creating the coalitions. The coalition has to come from the diverse little groups. I don't care if it's your book club. That can be part of this diversity training that needs to take place. We have the greatest opportunity in Los Angeles to do so. Obviously, we're privileged to have been exposed to all of the cultural diversity and race diversity and class diversity. But we also have the greatest challenges because we go from town to town. We go from Koreatown. We go from Chinatown. We go from, well, now Latinos tend to be everywhere, but you have East LA and whatever. There are you still feel like you're going through this cultural divide. It's beautiful because you get to witness firsthand the culture and the food and so forth. But we clearly have challenges. I don't have to articulate them. So let's get really practical to the nuts and bolts of how can we move forward and meet those challenges.
Ms. Brazon, if I could ask a question before we move on. Can you give us an example of one of your boards that you sat on where there was a divide, whether based on ethnicity, cultural background, age, whatever, and how it was resolved or not resolved and what the ramifications of that were?
Yes, we had employed a process that is outlined in a book that I highly recommend to people entitled Sitting in the Fire. And that was very apropos to what happens during the course of it. But the board was very prepared. The Caucasian members of our board thought that that the problem, because it was about race diversity, we knew there were problems there. They thought that those of us that were people of color, that the problem was going to start there, and it was going to be people of color versus the white folks, right? That was how everybody kind of went into this. It ended up being this huge emotional, crying, screaming encounter between African Americans and African and immigrants and non-immigrants. And the Caucasian and the Anglo folks on the board were stunned. I mean, they were literally stunned. They were paralyzed. You couldn't hear a peep out of them, right? At the end of this process, the people of color who had gone through that dialogue forever embraced and worked beautifully and love each other. We've all become like best friends. And the others were never able to have their emotions surface about things. So no matter how deep that divide is between brown and black, there is a cultural commonality that allows us to emotionally let it out. Just let it out and cry and express at the very basic level what these reservations are and how you feel hurt by something that somebody has said. And we found that the Anglo and Caucasian folks were very reserved. Again, that's the cultural divide. And so they might have been feeling the same things, but instead they just parroted back things they thought we might want to hear, right? And so they never really made the progress in the group, whereas the other people were instantly able to after that session. And so that's why, like, I'm very optimistic that brown and black and that the Asian community and all of us can come together, and I'm still a little bit more concerned about those of us that have an Anglican background that keeps us in a reserved state as well, and those are the painful things. So there was forward moving and the recognition that there has to be more and where those problems are.
How might you have handled that differently, looking back on it, to include the Anglo group and make them more part of the whole process?
I think that it was cut short because we ended up only having the one session, and I think that we needed to have the second session, which is what the one group had braced themselves for. It was so productive for us, but then we really needed to go on. So that's the other thing, is recognizing your progress in this, because none of us are devoid of a prejudice and bias. I mean, that's just the truth. We're all raised with aspects of it. So what we do is that it's a constant work in progress, and I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're world traveled, as I've traveled around the world and whatever. It certainly helps you, but all of us have our reservations about certain, anything that's different. So that's it. So don't cut your training short. If you go into one of these training sessions, it's not enough. You say, no, hey, you know what? We still have issues we have to deal with, and even if we take a break, let's resume this until we can get to a place where we can adequately and successfully work together.
Keep on going and embrace the pain.
Absolutely.
Mr. Al-Mayrati.
Just a few points I wanted to add. Number one, I think there was a disaster that took place here in 1992. It was the 1992 uprising. And there was a commission that was appointed by the city to come and talk about the conditions that led to that disaster and what we need to do to rectify that. And most of you were probably still in your diapers when that happened. But I worked for the city at that time, and I was working with various groups. One thing I noticed, and like a lot of commissions that come out and you put the nice commission report on the shelf, nothing really happens. And there was a whole Rebuild LA effort and a lot of money into that, and then it just fizzled after a few years. But one thing I noticed, and I want to salute Reverend Cecil Murray for that, is that no matter what happened in the city, Reverend Murray made sure that what happened in his church and in his neighborhood was not going to contribute to the problem, but was going to be part of the solution. And that's how we have to change strategically, is that, yes, there are a lot of problems out there. It seems overwhelming, but I'm going to be part of the solution, and I'll start with myself, and I'll work with my group, and then I'll deal with my congregation, and then I'll deal with my community, and then I'll deal with my society. And maybe society is lost. Maybe there's no hope. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But I will start with myself and my immediate circles now, and then work my way up. And then when I get to that level, I'll deal with that. Number two, from a socioeconomic standpoint, is that, again, the way we treat the poor. It's as if the poor made a choice to become poor. It's their fault for being poor. And so they deserve to be out on the streets. That's inexcusable. There is no excuse for the richest country in the world to have a homeless problem, whether it's in the South or in Los Angeles, California. There's just no excuse for that. It's unacceptable for us to leave that status quo going on. I mean, when Reagan changed the whole system and kicked out everybody from mental institutions and dumped them on the streets, and now you have some people who are just dealing with that situation, those realities, without any public service or social service for them. That is inexcusable. That has to change, and that could be one area that we can begin to work on. The last thing is, I follow the news pretty closely. To this day, I don't know what the death toll is for the Katrina disaster, and the government has not disclosed that number. It reminds me what happened in '91 when they wouldn't disclose the number of dead Iraqis after that first war. And again, it's that dehumanization of the other, and the other could be the poor, the other could be the other race, the other could be the other religion, whatever, but to combat dehumanization and combat stereotyping and scapegoating, it begins by putting a human face on the people who are most impacted and most affected. And we should demand the government to come out with the death toll. Was it 3,000? Was it 10,000? Was it 40,000? Because if it's, if it's more than 9/11 and we're still, 1 month afterwards not knowing what the death toll is, that also is unacceptable, and we need to demand for change there.
Well, like good social workers, I see the shift from the macro to the micro, which is a good thing, and I'm struck, particularly by Ms. Brazon's comments about how we have to work together as individuals and do the hard work one-on-one that needs to be done. And so I'm thinking in a softening economy, with still the dead yet to be counted, and the $5 billion, that's B as in boy, $billion. I have to tell you a joke. I know we're not here for jokes, but I got to tell you this joke. Really, it was reported that in a briefing, President Bush was told that Brazilians had been injured and killed in a tragedy. And he put his head in his hands. He said, "That's just horrible." And I picked his head up and said, "How many is a Brazilian?" But that's okay. What can I say? Anyway, like I was saying, Henny Youngman could take that one to the Catskills and do a lot better than I. Stick to what you do well. So what I was getting at, what I'm trying to get at, is how come with all of this going on, how come we're talking about gay marriage? Why are we talking about gay marriage? Why are we talking about gay marriage? When I went to this school, they tried to throw me out. No, I don't know why they tried to throw me out. So I was doing this, I knew you'd ask. I was doing this research called The Attitude of Mental Health Professionals Toward Homosexuality. And it was, an accidental probability, or you call it a snowball sample. I hardly remember any of that anymore, but I remember it sort of. And so one of the things I did was I presented at various social work staff meetings so I could get samples of people to answer my questionnaire. I did the Likert thing, how much do you agree on a scale of 1 to 7, that gay men should be hairdressers and, are better suited for careers in the theater and so on. Laugh now, the social workers were the most homophobic among all the mental health professionals, but that was a long time ago. Okay, what I'm getting at, and I'm getting there, my brain is a little like a popcorn machine, so just bear with me. Okay, so we end up with me presenting about a social worker here in Los Angeles by the name of Hindi Nobler, who advocated group psychotherapy as the best way to cure homosexuality. And she indicated in her writings that the important thing to do was to engage the homosexual patient in a therapeutic relationship of trust and then introduce the unacceptability of homosexuality. And I thought to myself, I was only a student, but I thought to myself, isn't that a covert agenda for a psychotherapist to have? I don't think that's right. And then I opened my big mouth and said so. And so Ms. Nobler called the School of Social Work and said, I want either a public apology or I want her out of that school. But I got to tell you, even though it was that many years ago, Dean Hamovich stood the test and said, her work is excellent, student quality work, and she hasn't done anything but quoted your own writing, so take a hike, lady. So, so the school stood up, even back in the day. So what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is, I used to say in those days, I practically had a bent back. I mean, you got to think now, I'll have to tell the truth, it was the 70s. I had to have a bent back to carry I carried in a big duffel bag to every single class I went to in the school. I carried a duffel bag. Inside the duffel bag was every article I knew about that said homosexuality was not a mental illness. And every time the professors would start, I'd say, just a moment, please, and dig out an article and start quoting. And there were about 3 or 4 other totally closeted lesbians, and they'd get to the point, they'd say, go, Terry, go. And I'd say, you know what, why don't you open your big mouth and get out of your closet and let them know I'm not the only one. Okay. I did, and I used to say, and the professors would just pull the hair. I used to say, until every one of us is gay, until every one of us is a lesbian, until every one of us is black, until every one of us steps forward and says, that's who I am, nothing's going to change, because it's them and us. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of interest groups and clubs, and Ms. Brazon commented on do it in your clubs, do it with each other. You have to. I can't walk a mile in someone else's shoes, but you can educate me as to what your life is like. I can educate you as to what my life is like. And if you are willing to get that education, to come with me to where I live, take me to where you live, so that I can understand that you are a culture that works on consensus. I'm first generation American, and Italians, we love to argue. We come to agreements by who yells the loudest, and well, that's the way we do it. So if we are going to work, well, I can just stick with my kind, and you can stick with your kind, and you with yours. Or if we're going to work together, you're going to have to teach me how that works. Okay? And I'm going to have to teach you how when we yell and jump up and down and carry on, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a cultural thing. And we can do that together. So we get it on the macro level, and you are the ones who are going to do it. You are the ones who are going to do it. You are going to do it with each other, to each other, for each other. And then for the clients, you'll see one day whether you're a clinical social worker or an administrative or whatever kind of social worker you become. You're going to do it one-on-one. It's the only way it can get done.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that, because you bring up the topic of them and us. And in fact, that's one of the questions that we wanted to pose here today, which is, do group-specific organizations, do group-specific clubs, gatherings, whatever, promote a multicultural society, or do they hinder a multicultural society? And depending on what your answer is, how do we overcome that?
Yeah,
and
sure.
that's for all the panelists.
Yeah, sure. And the answer is yes and no. The answer is, I run an organization for GLBT children and adolescents. And when we started our own school, everybody said, oh, you just want to ghettoize these kids, don't you just want to keep them all gay, and then you all go to West Hollywood, and they said, and what's a gay restaurant anyway? They serve gay food, and so on. And what I say is, we have to create a therapeutic holding environment. Because when a kid goes to school, and in high school, the 3 major areas in which kids get hassled are body size, race, and sexual orientation. So when you hear homo, faggot, queer, dyke all day long, homo, faggot, queer, dyke, it makes you feel bad about yourself. If I can create a therapeutic holding environment for you to help some of these wounds heal, then indeed we all have to live in the real world. So yes, there have to be affinity groups, and particularly, I might add, for GLBT kids, because black kids can go home, brown kids can go home and say, someone called me the N-word today, and the family can say, honey, you know, ignorant fools talk like that, but we and our family and our gay kids don't care. Somebody called me a faggot, and daddy says, well, what are you, little faggot? Straighten up and fly right. They don't say, our gay family, our gay. So these kids don't get that opportunity. But I do believe that we must be multicultural. We must live together and share with one another. But I think those special clubs, groups, affinity connections absolutely are important to create therapeutic holding environments and to create relief from some of the stuff you put up with in the rest of the world.
I quite agree. In 2030, 30% of Americans will be blacks and browns. In 2050, 50% of Americans will be blacks and browns. And DNA has traced our origins back to sub-Saharan Africa. So we only have one race, and we have many ethnicities, many cultures. 117 million years ago, the out-migration from Africa started. So there is an essential question to us 21st century people after all those millions of years. Aren't you getting a little old for this? Even as at this moment, someone would say, well, we're preaching to the choir. Well, in most churches, the choir is the problem. You catch on fire, somebody will come out to watch you burn. We have enough people beneath this roof to change the destiny of America. That destiny must come to the acceptance of differences as the strength of our culture and our country. We must also understand that our nation did not start out to be like that. We talked about a melting pot, which has been to our detriment, and it has caused us great pain. Instead of a melting pot where you pour everything in when the heat's on, it better come out white, the dominant culture, or it will not come out at all. Instead of the melting pot, we need the salad bowl, where we have differences, but each component contributes to that difference. Our problem is, instead of looking at our commonalities, we look at our particularities. For instance, somebody asks you, where are you from? You may say, oh, Georgia, New York, Alabama, whatever, California. Then if you go to Europe, where are you from? You say United States, America. If you go to the moon, where are you from? You'd say Earth. Now, you wouldn't give them your house address. So our commonalities will be our salvation. Under the skin, all people are kin. And the greatest challenge will come to the white elite, the power elite, because 98% of the net wealth of America is owned by whites. Blacks, for instance, own less than 1% of the net wealth. That's the way it was a century ago. That's the way it is today. So commonality becomes our choice over particularity, or else we will have nothing in common at all.
Reverend Murray, I may be doing something foolish, but let me respectfully challenge something you just said.
Please.
It's been said that the most segregated day in the week is Sunday, as people go to their house of worship, and it tends to be black, white, brown, yellow. How does that promote a multicultural society for us? And how do we make it promote a multicultural society for us?
What a solid question, because at this very moment, the religious right in America, the right-wing fundamentalism, is trying to take over politics when we cannot help but have separation of church and state. And we do want to remember that when it comes to wars in the last 4,000 years, we have had less than 300 years of peace. And the majority of those wars were religious wars. We religious people will fight over anything, and when there's nothing to fight about, we'll fight about that. The Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, we begin to dialogue more with each other. Buddhists, Taoists, Confucianists, Religion is supposed to join you together. I think the word religare, the pieces fit. But we use God for everything good, and we use God for everything bad. We will come together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish separately as fools, and we cannot blame God.
I'd also like to again respond to that same question, is that the commonality is not the problem. We all come together with people we have something in common with, whether it's the church or an organization. The problem is when you choose not to deal with the other differences within that group. As we already mentioned, that there's also an economic divide. And I'd like to ask, if you're in an organization where you're very careful about providing racial diversity, are you also providing economic diversity on that board? Do you bring in someone who is working with the homeless, is homeless themselves, or is lower income? Do you hold it against them because they don't have email, and so they're not going to be able to chime in on the gems that are exchanged in email conversations? Do you help that person then get the computer so they don't have to constantly run and stand in line at the library? We are very insensitive. I'll include myself in that, where you just don't think about it. You just assume everybody has a computer, and especially if they're coming on a board, in our case of a radio station, and we came across that situation. Someone who works with the poor, who has been homeless, who does not have email. And it was so foreign, and there were people who were outraged. Well, find a way to get email. We'll do this, da da da. And it is really incredible of how insensitive we are in our own little worlds. And that is the beginning of looking straight in the eye of the differences in our group. Let's not gloss over it and say, well, there's not a storm right now, so let's leave it alone. And so again, it's not the problem with the particulars of the nature of the organization, and it's what we do with it. And when we go into an organization, let's be the activists, let's provoke in a good way, and let's move things forward.
You know, in terms of religion dividing people and houses of worship being the most segregated, I think one of the problems that is really an issue for all of us in the faith communities is that groups, individuals use God to overwhelm others rather than serving God to serve God's creation. Yes. And that's what we have to change within the religious community. God is not there to be used to say, oh, he said this, therefore, you become God. And that is the worst sin, is that when you play the role of God and use his jurisdiction. Everything will be decided by God at some point in some time. For our purposes now, the main objective that God wants us to achieve is to promote justice and work for justice. Justice, to have a thirst for justice. And when we see injustice, that should make us move. That should make us work. Diversity is the will of God. In the divine text, it says, God created you from a single pair into nations and tribes so that you may learn from one another, not despise one another. So the diversity should be used to learn, to strengthen our society. And indeed, America has that opportunity for multiculturalism. And religious identifiers and ethnic identifiers and sexual orientation identifiers, or whatever other identifiers you're talking about, this is what makes America great, that cultural diversity. But yes, if these communities begin to live in ghettos, if there are Muslim ghettos popping up everywhere in our community, that's a problem for me. Because that means that we are isolating ourselves from society. That means we are disempowering ourselves in addition to that, and that means we are more of a target by the hate mongers. And by the way, when it comes to hate crimes, the number one target in a hate crime on any Middle East related violence, talking about when the Middle East conflict takes place over there, and then there's hate here in America and backlash, the number one target is not the Arab. It's either the Sikh or it is a Latino. There are more Sikhs killed after 9/11 than Arab Americans. There are more Latinos targeted with violent hate crimes, because those are the two that are confused to be Arabs. And I remember even going to, we went to a camp, and we had a retreat at a camp here, and we were having lunch in the cafeteria, and there were about 100 of us, 100 Muslims, and there were Bosnians, there were Anglo, there were Hispanic, there were African American, Arab American, and one of the cooks was talking to another cook. He goes, "Hey, are those Arabs?" And the other person, "No, in fact, I saw white people in this group, and I saw people of so many different colors and different ethnicities." And that's the reality of religion. There is no them versus us, because there's no us. Even the us is not monolithic. Even in America, it's not a monolithic us. It's the red us and the blue us, even when we talk about politics. So let us do away from this simplistic way of looking at the world and the way we look at ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would like to make a very, very brief process observation, because I'm a little uncomfortable. We, as social workers, know that we need not only, quote, tolerate our differences, we really must embrace them. We must embrace them. And I tell you, I'm a practicing Roman Catholic. Nobody asked. I'm a practicing Roman Catholic, 17 years at Catholic school. Dear God. And when I get tired of kneeling all the time, I go to Unity Church and get real with Bishop Bean. So that's my backup church. But you know what? I bet you there are some atheists in this room. And if I were an atheist, I can't tell you how uncomfortable I'd be right now. I'd be really uncomfortable. I'd be like back in the day when people of color often tried to pass for white, when Jews changed their names so they would be thought of as Gentiles. And get me wrong, I would be thrilled to go out with any atheist in this room or any group of atheists and break out a bottle of Chianti and a few cups of espresso and argue the entire day away, telling you how wrong you are. But that's different from respecting and embracing the differences. So I hear all of us, I'll include myself, talking about God and what God wants. And I just want to make that process observation and acknowledge that I assume there are some atheists in this room. And I apologize for anything I've said that might have made you uncomfortable.
Thank you for that comment. If I can also take the liberty of weighing in, because when I was a student here, I was the president of the Asian Pacific Caucus, and I know that the caucuses still exist. And I think one of the things that the caucuses need to do is not only promote their own group, but promote the other groups,
Yes.
to talk about the commonalities and to have those types of interactions. If I can just share one story, and that is of my wife, who is also an MSW graduate from USC, who works for the Japanese American National Museum. The day after 9/11, the Japanese American National Museum was the first group to come out and publicly proclaim that we understand and we support our Arab American brothers and sisters, and that we support those who practice the Muslim faith, because we as Japanese Americans understood what they were up against given the attack that had just happened in New York City. And I think it's important for all of our groups to promote our own issues, but also to promote the issues of the other, if you will.
Michael, if you would just allow one thought, we would do well to consider, rather than unity, community. Our goal should be community, not unity.
Ms. Brazon.
Yes, and I'd like to also raise something that may going to be very controversial. And that is, given the new Supreme Court profile, affirmative action is bound to be center stage again. And I want to say, as I look around the room, number one, obviously, I'm a very strong supporter of affirmative action. But it also should not be by those who feel they are not the beneficiaries of affirmative action for them to blame the other students who are. The real culprit here is an educational system that does not allow for anyone who wants an education to get financial aid, or better yet, a free education, a free college education. And that is the real evil here. And we can't fall into, as the economic pie gets smaller and smaller, then everybody starts fighting for that. And I have seen, again, very progressive, otherwise very progressive people, including young people, start using the quota language and start assimilating what the powers that be would like you to manifest in lieu of what they should be providing, which is a free education for everyone. And please, as young people, please don't fall into that. I know that it's an individual thing. Everybody wants their education. We need to have more discussions about the roots and how affirmative action came about and the benefits of it, and that is really the only way we can integrate into our society in a meaningful and cohesive way. Thank you.
We're at that point in our discussion where we'd like to take questions from the audience. And so if there are any questions, please raise your hand. But as we're doing that, I'd like to draw your attention to the wall over to my left, to your right, which is a wall that has an exhibit called Diverse Jewish Faces. Please take a moment after we're done here to look at the pictures and to see the diversity in the faces of those who are from Jewish backgrounds. And I think it talks about the very nature of what we're here today to talk about, building community and building bridges. Questions from the audience? Yes, in the back, and we'll bring a mic to you.
Hi, my name is Lauren Delgado, and I just had a question. I was leaving LA Unified School District, a job I had before I came to this graduate program, and one of the coordinators of a program that I worked with had a conference manual that she was intending to go to a conference on poverty and helping her community. And I noticed that in the booklet that she had and in the packet provided, they included like a teacher's or a coordinator's manual that had us and them labels, like how to help people in poverty using them and us. How can we address like that? My question is, how can we address labeling problems? Like always saying, oh, we need to help them and we need to help those people, and excluding yourself, you know? I don't know if that makes sense.
You know, I'm kind of a research junkie, even though I can't remember the difference between pi square and chi-square. But one is about 22 1/3 or something. But I do remember Ullman and Krasner's work, and please look that up and do a good job of reading it, because Ullman and Krasner talked about how people behave in terms of the labels assigned to them. When you call someone a drunk, perhaps that person was inebriated 3 times last week, but when you call them a drunk, guess what you get? A drunk. And so all of us need to be cautious about the use of labels, because people often tend to behave in terms of the labels. You're stupid, you're lazy, you're et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, positive stereotypes, so-called positives, that's a oxymoron, isn't it? Positive stereotype. I'll tell you a very quick story told to me by Damian Martin, the co-founder of Hetrick Martin Institute for the Protection of Gay and Lesbian Youth in New York. He lived in a condominium, and his next door neighbor, and they were good friends, was an African-American woman who one time knocked on his condo door and said, Damien, would you mind coming over to my apartment for a moment? He said, sure. He went there. She said, what do you think about the fabric I'm thinking about for my couch? And he said, I don't know. And she said, well, but you know, how do you think it might contrast with the colors of the wall? And he said, you know what? I'll help you pick the fabric, and when I finish, will you teach me how to dance? Okay? Clearly, not all black folk are great dancers. You see my godchild, that's really scary. Um, and not all gay men are interior decorators. And again, and the study that I did back in the day when I was a graduate student here, which was published in a journal called Social Work with Groups, was exactly about those labeling, that gay men are expected to be clever and funny and witty, when in fact they may be clever and funny and witty to protect themselves from you, because if I can make you laugh, then you're not going to assault me. So the gay men are not all funny, not all witty, not all good dressers, not all good, etc. You get the point.
And I think that what, sorry, it's me, I guess. That what I think is critical here is, once again, the dialogue. Talk to poor people and talk to the people that you're talking about and trying to help. Do not assume. I remember when we went to Nicaragua and we were working with a group to build houses, and these wonderful architects built these houses with this wonderful indoor plumbing that they had never had. The women were outraged because the only time they said they got time away from their husbands was to go down to the river to wash the clothes. And that really taught me a lesson in terms of my organizing here. And that is, you have got to talk to people. They may or may not be offended by whatever labels sometimes were so politically correct that they laugh at us, right? I mean, this has also happened. I saw this once with a cartoon on Speedy Gonzalez where Chicanos here were really offended and the Mexicans were not. So there you go. You never know. So so that's the key to that. And we all just have to be sensitive, but you can't talk to each other. You can't, I mean, it can't be she and I having a conversation about what we think the person that we're trying to help or whose life we're trying to better or whatever is going to want or is going to need. You can't buy them a computer to have the email to be on your board if they then resent the fact that, oh my God, don't you know, I don't even have a refrigerator. I have to buy ice for the cooler to keep my milk cold. So we really, really have to dig deep, go below the surface, even for how we refer to them.
And you know what? Your textbooks are now saying that systems theory, what's wrong with systems theory is that it makes assumptions about systems and about how families work and what's right and what's wrong. And postmodern therapy, the social worker assumes the posture of, I don't know nothing. Now that's a tough one for us because we come armed with all of our books and our training, that we don't know anything about the families we're working with, and we don't know what they need. And there is no point in us bringing them one thing when they need another thing, or being so presumptuous and arrogant as to think we know what will make their lives better.
A recent study by Harvard University says that 50% of blacks and browns will not finish high school. So we are going to have to do much more about positive imaging. Meanwhile, when it comes to the negative imaging that many of our young people receive, we have to teach them the old African proverb, it's not the name you call me, it's the name I answer to.
Oh, yeah. My name is Kenneth Jackson. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for being here. It's really a special pleasure. Also, just before I make my comment, looking at the wall, my friends call me the beeper, Black Ethiopian American princess, half Jewish, half black, some other stuff. But you talked about a lot of stuff today, but no one, this is directly to you, Teresa, brought up, one of the things I'm very concerned about is sort of the rebirth of devaluation of women in this country. And I find it very interesting, speaking of Islam and Muslims, that we are so concerned about what Muslim women wear, not really aware of the respect that comes with covering one's body, because Muslim men, a true Muslim man has respect for a woman's body, and we're running around here with our tits hanging out and our butts and these booty videos, and these are the things that young men are seeing, and especially when we're looking at rap videos, and particularly young white men are seeing these images of black women shaking their butt, and then they're going to school with these sexist images and these racist images. And so the two things that I wanted someone to speak about was this rebirth, this backlash and devaluation of women in the society. And also touch on someone, please, about the American Disability Act, because it's not just about white or black or Latino or Muslim or poor. We still have people, hundreds of thousands of people in this country that have disabilities and they can't get their needs met.
Thank you for that question. It's a very comprehensive question. What I'm going to try to do is take the liberty, A, not to be a microphone hog, and B, not to try to answer the entirety of your question. There's a cartoonist, his name escapes me, but he's one who has written and lampooned, if you will, the way in which we, in terms of, again, Ms. Brazon's comments about the ways in which we're so politically correct, and he's himself a wheelchair disabled person. He says, I'm a cripple, call me a cripple. And his last cartoon that I saw was a desert scene with a wheelchair turned over and somebody saying, don't worry, he won't get far on foot. So obviously this is someone who's got a good sense of humor about his own disability. But I'm going to leave that alone and talk just for a second about the issue of the devaluation of women. First of all, Kate Millett, well-known feminist, writer, political thinker, artist, crazy person, went to Iraq and Iran a good 25 years ago and wrote a book about it, and got herself arrested because she went there to tell those women they were oppressed and they needed to take those garments off, and so forth and so forth. What a stupid idea that was. She's an artist and a writer and a thinker for whom I have enormous respect, but she really was off her game on that one. And I think it's a complex issue, this devaluation of women. I think at the same time it's also a natural evolution in the post-feminist America. I really do think it is. I love Queen Latifah before she became a big star. She did a comedy routine. I think it's still available on CD, where she does a rap thing, and she says, I ain't your bitch and I ain't your hoe, and my name ain't Yo. And I think it's about the respect that we ask for. And I teach, currently I teach Introduction to Social Welfare and Social Policy out at Cal State Northridge. And I'm astonished when I see students come in and they have trousers that on each, well, let's call it what it is, cheek, it says, grab here. On one cheek it says grab, and the other it says here. And another one with a T-shirt across, a very tight T-shirt across a rather ample lung area, and it says, eat me. And I want to say what I'd like to do is dismiss you from this room. So, but I think that's a natural kind of my dear friend Griff Humphreys, a PhD from this program, who passed away from AIDS some years ago, who used to talk to me often about the importance of bearing witness. No matter who was listening, it is important to bear witness. And he used to talk so much about this issue when it comes to the evolution of feminism and post-feminism. And what he wrote about was the bifurcation of gay male development, and how when gay men coming up repress their sexual orientation, and then when they're 25 or 26, they look like crazy teenagers. All the dancing and the discoing and the sex, and so that's a natural part of development. And I think young women today are reaping the benefits of the work we early feminists did and don't quite know what to do with it yet. And I think if we help them I guess I'm saying we, and you are, many of you are the young women, but some of you are concerned about it, to help young women to kind of find a more level ground in which to be, the kind of freedom, the Title IX Act in terms of the amount of money that has to be put forth for women's sports. Look, we got a football team. Now, if only my Raiders could catch up and do this well. You got a football team that is awesome, but your women's sports have to get the same amount of money, and a lot of people hate that. So young women are drinking in and slaking their thirst with the juices of the fruit we produced, and I think it's just going to take some time to level out. I'm not so worried about that, and I'm going to defer on the other.
Yes, I'd like to comment that even though I came from the same generation of the beginning of that women's movement, I never felt a part of it. And I found it to be, I did not take to the gender neutrality of it. I did not take to the move toward wearing men's clothes in order to show your power, and I understood it. I understood it for its time. But I never felt that there was a movement that was built for me, including Latina women that have their own type of culture. I still wore my red lipstick and the makeup you see. And by the way, when I went for International Women's Day to a huge conference, international conference in Paris, even 10 years ago, mostly women from here and from Europe, and then some from Muslim nations where they had to defend the use of their veil. And many women said to me, because I was the only one among the thousands there with red lipstick, and that my makeup was equivalent to that veil. That brand of Western feminism, as it has come to be known, is not something that was ultimately helpful for where we are right now. So whether it's differences in how you dress and or your makeup or whatever, that is the richness of the cultural diversity and of your individual diversity. Let's not let your individual diversity be drowned out, including if you are a woman. That does not define your feminism and your potency as a woman. And you do not have to be gender neutral. And we are facing, I never thought back then that we would be having discussions and that Roe v. Wade would be threatened in this day and age. And that every day this week, because of the new justice that is being nominated, that we are facing the possibility of that. And what scares me is that if there was a movement that was started back in the 60s, that momentum was not maintained, because we do not have a politicized and a socially viable constituency that we can say, let's take to the streets. And it isn't just about birth control, but that was a movement that went beyond the right to choose, because then we would have something substantive, we would have millions in the street. In fact, I don't think that they would dare to have nominated that justice if it wasn't that they don't feel us out there as women, and we better get to work now.
And with regards to Muslim countries and women in Muslim countries, there's definitely a major problem in terms of women's rights and equality in many of the Muslim countries. The problem that I think we have as a country here in the United States is the way we approach other countries and start telling them what their problems are. And no matter what the issue is, right off the bat, that backfires. And I think Teresa Hughes, who's the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, learned a lesson when she went to Saudi Arabia and to Turkey and to Iraq and started preaching to the people there about their problems, and they said, wait a minute, you don't understand what we're going through. The process of emancipation for many people in Muslim countries, men and women, is they want to see reform within Islam. I think the Western way of going about it and saying, well, you need to secularize first, is a non-starter. It doesn't help out the people there. My wife was appointed by Hillary Clinton to be a U.S. delegate to the Beijing Conference on the Status of Women, and she learned a lot from there. And one of the things that she learned also is the level of ignorance here, the Feminist Majority Foundation called her up and said, "We'd like you to come and speak. Please bring your burqa." And she says, "I don't have a burqa." "Oh, come on, you have to have something. Bring your chador." "I don't have a chador." And it's this continuous stereotyping that a Muslim woman has to have that. The way we look at it as Muslims is a woman has a right to choose however she wants to dress. It depends on how she feels most comfortable in expressing her modesty. The same for men, by the way, which is in the Quran, is that it's men and women that are supposed to be modest, not just women. But regardless, when it comes to the headscarf or the chador or the burqa, our position is we should be pro-choice and let the woman decide how she wants to dress. That's a personal choice. That's between her and God, not between me and God to tell her what to do.